When greed knocks on the wrong door, the true meaning of loyalty is revealed in the most unexpected way. Would you stand your ground when everything you love is under threat? Let us know in the comments section below. We can't wait to hear your thoughts. Wendy Gosling tightened the worn leather straps around the saddle, her fingers moving by memory more than focus. The bay mare, Misty, nickered softly under her breath, sensing her owner's agitation. Wendy's jaw tensed, her mind not on the day's chores, but on the letter stuffed in her jacket pocket. A letter with an offer that didn't ask, but demanded. "Ma'am, you gotta think about it," her neighbor Pete had said that morning, his cap twisting nervously in his hands. "Whitmore ain't the type to just go away." Wendy wiped the dust off her jeans and straightened, looking over the rolling fields that Daniel had once walked with such pride. This land wasn't just dirt and grass to her. It was blood and memory, sacrifice and legacy. She wasn't about to hand it over because some rich suit thought he could slap a number on it. Across the fence line, a sleek black Escalade kicked up a trail of dust as it barreled down the gravel road toward her. Wendy wiped her hands on a rag, tossing it onto the fence post. She could already guess who was inside. Preston Whitmore stepped out with a kind of casual arrogance that only money could breed. His tan blazer looked out of place against the raw, living backdrop of the farm, his sunglasses flashing as he took in the property like a hawk circling prey. "Wendy," he called out, that salesman's smile sliding across his face. "Gorgeous day." She didn't bother to return the smile. "What do you want, Whitmore?" He clucked his tongue, strolling toward her like he had all the time in the world. "Same as yesterday and the day before that. To help you, Wendy, that's all. Free you from all this." He waved a manicured hand, gesturing broadly to the fields. Wendy crossed her arms. "This is my home." Preston's smile stiffened just a hair. "It doesn't have to be your burden." She let the silence stretch between them, the only sound the distant rustle of wind through the wheat. Wendy had seen this kind of man before, slick, polished, used to winning. Men like Preston didn't make offers. They made ultimatums dressed up in pretty words. Monsieur Dab." "I said—" Preston pulled off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were sharp, calculating. "I admire your spirit. Daniel would too, no doubt. He was a good man. Shame what happened." The muscles in Wendy's stomach tightened. She fought the urge to punch that smug look right off his face. "But," Preston continued smoothly, "this world moves forward. We can't cling to the past forever. Let me make it easy for you. I've drawn up the paperwork. You sign today, and you walk away with enough to live comfortable anywhere you want. You deserve that, Wendy. Not this dying dream." He reached into his briefcase and held out a stack of papers, bound neatly with a gold clip. It might as well have been dripping poison. She stared at the papers, but didn't move to take them. "I'm not for sale, and neither is Daniel's dream." Preston's face darkened ever so slightly. There it was, the crack in the polished veneer. "Think about it," he said tightly, pushing the papers onto the fence post before sliding his sunglasses back on. "I'll be back tomorrow, and every day after that. We can do this the easy way, Wendy, or the hard way." Without waiting for a response, he turned on his heel and walked back to his Escalade, his expensive shoes crunching against the gravel. The engine roared to life, kicking up dust that clouded Wendy's view. She didn't cough. She didn't even flinch. "Deal." She just watched him go, her fists clenching slowly at her sides. As the sound of the SUV faded into the distance, Wendy took the papers from the fence post, marched into her farmhouse, and tossed them straight into the wood stove. The flames devoured the pages instantly, sending up a blackened smoke that curled against the ceiling. She watched until nothing was left but ashes. Wendy Gosling hadn't fought through 2 years of widowhood, 5 mortgages, and an endless sea of grief just to roll over now. Hurt? No. If Preston Whitmore wanted a fight, he was going to get one. She just didn't know yet that she wouldn't be fighting it alone. The next morning, Wendy awoke to the sound of heavy machinery rumbling somewhere near the southern fence line. She didn't even bother with coffee. She yanked on her boots, grabbed Daniel's old denim jacket from the hook by the door, and marched outside. A convoy of trucks was parked along the easement road, flatbeds loaded with bulldozers and surveyors' equipment. Men in neon vests milled around, hammering stakes into the earth, unrolling bright orange construction tape. They moved with mechanical efficiency, heads down, eyes averted, like they were trying not to think too hard about what they were doing. Wendy crossed the yard, Misty whinnying at her from the paddock, sensing the tension bleeding into the air. Wendy's heart pounded, but her steps never faltered. She pushed through the rough weeds, climbed the splintered fence, and landed hard on the other side. The foreman, a squat man with a clipboard and a sunburned neck, turned when he spotted her. He adjusted his hard hat and gave her a nervous smile. "Morning, Mom," he said, like this was all normal, like he was delivering a package, not digging into sacred ground. Wendy planted herself squarely between the foreman and the rest of her fields. "You're trespassing." The man scratched at his neck, glancing over his shoulder. Preston Whitmore, dressed in another tailored blazer, was standing a few yards away, chatting on his phone. Wendy could see the glint of his Rolex catching the morning sun. "Oh, I got permits, ma'am," the foreman mumbled, tapping the clipboard. "This is my land," Wendy said, her voice low and lethal. "And I sure as hell didn't sign anything giving you permission to be here." The foreman shrugged helplessly. "Talk to Mr. Whitmore. He's the one with the orders." She didn't need a road map. She stomped past the foreman, crossed the uneven soil, until she stood a few feet from Preston. He looked up from his phone, smiled like he'd been expecting her. "You're early," he said pleasantly. "You were breaking the law," Wendy shot back. Preston slid his phone into his pocket, fixing her with that calm, calculating stare. "Actually, I'm following the law. See, the county authorized preliminary surveying for development. I have the easements, I have the signatures." His smile widened, teeth gleaming. "And thanks to a few generous donations to the zoning committee, I have the fast-tracked green light to start prepping for construction." Wendy's throat tightened. "You bribed them?" Preston shrugged. "Influenced, persuaded, call it what you want. Fact is, Wendy, you're out of moves." Behind him, the surveyors continued hammering stakes into the soil, carving up her memories 1 square foot at a time. "Don't worry," Preston said, his voice softening into a mockery of sympathy. "I'll make sure there's a commemorative plaque. Something tasteful. In Daniel's honor." For a moment, Wendy couldn't breathe. Her fists trembled at her sides, nails biting into her palms. She thought about Daniel's face, tanned and smiling, dirt on his jeans, pride in his eyes every time he fixed a broken fence or coaxed another row of corn out of stubborn earth. She thought about the night he told her with a boyish grin that they would grow old here together, that this farm would be there forever. "You listen to me, Whitmore," Wendy said, her voice shaking with fury. "I don't care how many politicians you buy. I don't care how many permits you forge. This land doesn't belong to you. And you will not take it from me." Preston's smile thinned. "We'll see." He turned his back to her without another word, striding toward a group of workers unloading fencing equipment. Wendy stood there for a moment longer, heart hammering, blood roaring in her ears. Then she spun on her heel and headed back toward the house, kicking up clouds of dust with every furious step. Inside, she tore open the old wooden desk in the study, shoving aside bills and receipts until she found what she needed. Daniel's old service records, his discharge papers, the faded photograph of him and his unit standing shoulder to shoulder in desert fatigues, grinning like brothers. Wendy swallowed the lump in her throat. Her fingers found the little black address book tucked inside the folder, pages worn thin from years of thumbed-over memories. She flipped through it, scanning names, numbers scribbled in Daniel's familiar looping handwriting. Marcus Pennant. She hesitated only a second before picking up the phone. Her hands didn't tremble this time. 3 rings. Then a gravelly voice answered. Marcus, Wendy said, forcing her voice steady. It's Wendy Gosling. A pause, then a softer, warmer tone. Wendy, it's been a long time. I need help, she said, cutting straight through the niceties. They're trying to take the farm. Daniel's farm. Another pause, short, sharp, deadly. Tell me where, Marcus said. She gave him the address. He didn't ask questions, he didn't make promises, he just said, hold tight, and hung up. Wendy set the phone down slowly, staring at the silent receiver like it held the weight of the world. The front porch creaked under her boots as she stepped outside again. She stood there for a long time, watching the bulldozers lining up at the edge of her fields, ready to devour everything she and Daniel had built. She didn't know what Marcus had planned. She didn't know if it would even matter. But for the first time since Preston Whitmore had rolled into town, Wendy felt the faintest spark of hope stir inside her chest. Hope? And a slow, burning anger that nothing and no one could extinguish. Quoth across the yard, Misty snorted and pawed the ground, restless, sensing the battle brewing on the horizon. Wendy squared her shoulders against the gathering storm. Whatever came next, she would meet it head-on. And she wouldn't be standing alone. The first sign of their arrival wasn't the sound of trucks or the rumble of engines. It was the flag, an old Marine Corps flag, whipping in the early afternoon breeze as 3 pickup trucks rolled down the country road toward Wendy's farm. Dust rose behind them like a battle standard, shimmering in the sunlight, and for a brief, heart-clutching moment, Wendy could have sworn she saw Daniel standing there, hands on his hips, grinning that lopsided grin of his. She blinked hard, and the illusion vanished. But what remained was real, and it was glorious. The trucks pulled up to the house in a tight formation. Before the dust even settled, the doors swung open and men poured out. Some had silver streaking their hair, others bore fresh tattoos and scars, but all of them carried the unmistakable posture of Marines. Upright, sharp, unwavering. Marcus Bennett was the first to approach. His hair was shaved down to stubble, and he moved with a slow, deliberate confidence, the kind earned only through too many tours and too many deserts. He took off his sunglasses, squinting against the sun. When he smiled, it was small but genuine. "Wendy Gosling," he said, voice rough with the weight of the years between. "Marcus," she breathed, a tightness loosening in her chest that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Without hesitation, he closed the gap between them and pulled her into a one-armed hug, careful and respectful, the kind of embrace that said, "We haven't forgotten you." Behind him, the others gathered, nodding respectfully, removing hats. Familiar names came flooding back: Trey, McConnell, Rivera, and Griggs. Men who had stood beside Daniel halfway across the world, facing down nightmares most folks in this town couldn't even imagine. Marcus pulled back, studying her face. "You should have called sooner." "I didn't want to," Wendy said honestly. "I thought I could handle it." "You can," Marcus said simply. "But you don't have to." The knot in her throat threatened to choke her, but she swallowed it down. There was no time for tears, not today. "What's the situation?" Marcus asked, slipping seamlessly into mission mode. Wendy jerked her head toward the south fields. "Rich developer. Name's Preston Whitmore. Thinks he can bully me off the land. He's got surveyors and heavy equipment setting up already." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Permit?" "Look, and paid for. County's in his pocket." Marcus glanced over his shoulder at the rest of the men who were already unloading gear from the trucks. Coolers, tarps, toolboxes. It looked more like they were setting up for an operation than a family picnic. "We've dealt with worse," Marcus said with a grim smile. Trey, a broad-shouldered man with a jagged scar running from his temple to his cheekbone, chimed in, "Guy doesn't know what he's started." Riggs, younger and wiry, spat into the dirt. "No one messes with a Marine's widow." The men set to work without another word. Wendy watched, overwhelmed by the simple, stunning efficiency of it. Within minutes, they had set up a makeshift command post under the old oak tree near the house. Maps were rolled out, binoculars unpacked, walkie-talkies clicked to life. It wasn't just friendship, it was loyalty. It was a code she had only ever glimpsed in Daniel's quiet moments, the unbreakable bond of those who had stood together when the world tried to tear them apart. Preston Whitmore, still strutting across her southern fields like a peacock, hadn't seen it yet, but he was about to. Rivera jogged back from the tree line, carrying a notepad filled with quick sketches. "Guy's bringing in bulldozers tomorrow," he reported. "Looks like he's going to start clearing even if you're still here." Wendy's stomach twisted. "Can he legally do that?" Marcus shrugged. "Legal's got nothing to do with it when you've got crooked officials backing you. But don't worry." He turned to the men. "We're not going to let 1 inch of this land get touched." They started laying out a plan. Posititions, watches, patrol shifts, like it was a forward operating base instead of a farmhouse. Wendy couldn't help but smile through the fear, a sense of awe filling her chest. "Marcus," she said hesitantly, "I appreciate this, all of it, but I don't want anyone getting into trouble because of me." Marcus gave her a look that could have carved stone. "Your family. End of story." Trey grinned, adjusting a battered baseball cap. "Besides, it's been a while since we had a proper mission." Griggs cracked his knuckles. "Feels like old times already." The men posted up along the perimeter of the property, blending into the natural landscape like they'd been born from it. Wendy watched from the porch as they moved, heart steady, eyes sharp. She realized she hadn't felt this safe since before Daniel had died. Late that afternoon, the inevitable confrontation came. Preston's Escalade returned, this time bringing company, 2 black sedans and a yellow bulldozer lumbering behind like a mechanical beast. Out climbed Preston, 2 men in cheap suits, and a handful of workers with hard hats and clipboards. They marched right up to the fence, Preston leading the charge like a king surveying his future kingdom. Wendy met them at the fence line, her posture unyielding. Preston flashed his signature grin. "Wendy, Wendy?" "Didn't expect company." She didn't reply, just waited. From the shadows under the trees, Marcus and Trey emerged. From behind the old barn, Rivera and Griggs appeared. One by one, Daniel's brothers-in-arms flanked her, silent sentinels, arms crossed over powerful chests. Ethan's smile faltered. "Who are they?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Friends," Wendy said simply. Preston tried to recover, his tone slipping into oily charm. "Now look, there's no need for this to get messy. I'm authorized to clear this land. You're welcome to stay on the property until the legal process is finalized." "No," Wendy said. Preston blinked. "Excuse me? You're not stepping 1 foot onto this land." Preston's jaw clenched. He glanced at his hired muscle, then at the Marines standing behind Wendy, their faces cold, their bodies still as statues. Something in his expression shifted, an understanding dawning, a recognition that maybe, just maybe, he had underestimated the battle he'd picked. Preston forced a chuckle. "This isn't over." Wendy tilted her head slightly, steel in her gaze. "No. It's just beginning." Preston turned sharply and stalked back to his convoy, barking orders to his men. Engines roared to life, the heavy machinery growling in frustration as it reversed course. Wendy watched them go, her heart hammering but her feet rooted firm into the earth. Beside her, Marcus gave a low, approving grunt. "You did good," he said quietly. "We're not done," Wendy murmured. "Not yet," Marcus agreed, "but we're ready." As the sun dipped low over the fields, casting long golden shadows across the farm, Wendy knew one thing for certain. The fight for her home had truly begun. And this time, she had an army behind her. Night fell thick and heavy over the Gosling farm, the sky an endless stretch of black velvet punctured only by scattered stars. Wendy sat on the porch steps, a worn blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her boots tapping a restless rhythm against the wood. Inside the house, the soft murmur of voices buzzed as Marcus and the others pored over maps and planned the next day's defenses. Out here, Wendy let herself breathe, let the night sink into her skin like armor. It didn't take long for trouble to come. The first sign was the low thud of boots moving too quickly through the field, the sharp snapping of stalks crushed underfoot. Wendy rose instantly, her muscles tensing. A flicker of light caught her eye, a small flame blossoming into a torch not 50 yards from the barn. Her heart jerked painfully in her chest. She bolted toward the house, shoving the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. "Fire!" she barked. The men moved as one. No questions, no hesitation. Rivera and Griggs grabbed the fire extinguishers kept near the kitchen and bolted for the barn. Marcus and Trey flanked Wendy, weapons drawn. Not guns, but old-fashioned blunt-bore tools like crowbars and hammers, instruments of defense, not aggression. They had agreed early on. They were here to protect, not provoke. Wendy sprinted after them, her boots pounding against the packed earth. The fire hadn't caught yet, but a crude Molotov cocktail lay shattered against the side of the barn, flames licking at the dry wood, greedy and wild. Rivera moved fast, aiming the fire extinguisher at the base of the flames, cutting through the fire with thick clouds of chemical spray. Griggs followed up, kicking the smoldering debris into the dirt and stamping it out. It wasn't just vandalism, it was a warning. From the tree line, shadows shifted, and a handful of figures melted back into the darkness, disappearing into the night. Cowards, Wendy thought, her hands clenching into fists so tight her nails bit into her palms. Marcus scanned the edge of the property, his mouth a hard line. "Recon team," he muttered, "testing our response time, seeing how fast we move." "They're not going to stop," Trey added grimly, holstering his hammer. "No," Wendy said, voice steady despite the fury bubbling under her ribs. "They're not." Back at the house, the men set double watches, rotating two-man patrols across the property all night. Wendy tried to sleep, but every creak, every gust of wind kept her eyes wide open. She ended up sitting at the kitchen table, cradling a mug of black coffee, staring at nothing until the horizon bled gray with the coming dawn. The next day came with more than just smoke damage. A call from the electric company informed her that the service orders she requested for disconnection would be completed within 24 hours. Wendy slammed the phone down so hard it cracked against the counter. She hadn't made any such request. It was sabotage, plain and simple. Riggs cursed low under his breath. "They're trying to make the place unlivable." "Break her down," Marcus said, pacing. "Psychological warfare. Cut power, cut water, drive her off, without ever having to swing a hammer." "We can reroute the generator," Rivera suggested. "It's old, but it'll run the essentials." Trey nodded. "We can stockpile water, too. Lock this place down." Wendy looked at the men, their faces grim but determined. "I'm not leaving," she said, though she knew she didn't have to say it. They already knew. That afternoon, Preston returned, not in his Escalade, but in a brand-new black pickup, accompanied by 2 more suited men and what appeared to be a private security detail. 4 bulky men in tactical vests stepped out, surveying the farm like they were casing a battlefield. Preston sauntered to the fence, stopping a few feet short. He didn't smile this time. "You're escalating things," he called out, voice carrying across the yard. Wendy crossed her arms. Marcus appeared at her side without a word, and the others flanked them. A wall of unbreakable solidarity. "You are the ones sending arsonists in the middle of the night," Wendy said coolly. Preston's expression didn't flicker. "Prove it." "You're desperate," Marcus said, his tone like iron scraping steel. "Means you're Preston ignored him, locking eyes with Wendy. "This doesn't end well for you. I'm giving you one more chance. Sign the papers, take the money, walk away." Wendy stepped forward until only the fence separated them. She leaned in just slightly, enough for him to hear the words clear and sharp. "I'm not for sale. And I'm not afraid of you." Something ugly twisted across Preston's face. For a heartbeat, Wendy thought he might lose the slick mask he wore so carefully. But then he exhaled slowly, flashing a tight, humorless smile. "You're gonna regret this," he said, turning on his heel. The security men lingered a second longer, sizing up Marcus and the others. Then they, too, retreated, boots crunching over gravel as they followed their boss back to the truck. The moment they disappeared down the road, Wendy felt the adrenaline drain from her all at once, leaving her shaky but standing. "We're going to have company tonight," Marcus said, almost to himself. "You think they'll come back?" Wendy asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He pulled a battered cigar from his pocket, rolling it between his fingers. Finally, he said, "Men like Whitmore don't like losing. They don't know how to lose." He tapped the cigar against his palm, but didn't light it. "Then we dig in." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the fields. The men fortified the house and barn, reinforcing door frames, setting up tripwires that would jingle empty cans if someone tried to sneak through the fields. Wendy helped wherever she could, her body moving on autopilot, fueled by stubbornness and rage. Just before dark, Marcus gathered them all under the oak tree. "We stick to nonviolence," he said, voice low but firm. "Defend the property. Document everything. No one throws a punch unless they're hit first. We show restraint. We show discipline." The men nodded, accepting the rules without complaint. They had faced worse odds with fewer resources and lived to tell about it. Wendy looked at them. Daniel's brothers, and felt a fierce, consuming gratitude burn in her chest. They hadn't just come to help. They had come to honor Daniel's memory, and by extension, her fight. As darkness swallowed the last light from the sky, Wendy took her place by the front porch, shotgun resting in her lap. Not to fire, only to show that she wasn't afraid. The night pressed close around the farm, dense and suffocating. Somewhere beyond the tree line, engines idled, shadows moved. Wendy took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. Whatever came, she was ready. They all were. It began just after midnight. The first truck came in slow, its headlights off, creeping down the narrow dirt path that bordered the southern fields. Wendy spotted the movement from her post on the porch, a dark shape blotting out pieces of the horizon. She didn't move, didn't blink. She simply reached behind her and tapped twice against the wood, the signal Marcus had taught her earlier that night. From the shadows of the barn, figures stirred. Marcus, Trey, Rivera, Griggs. Silent as ghosts, but ready for battle. The second truck followed the first, heavier, its wheels crunching gravel louder despite the driver's best efforts. Wendy caught a glimpse of two men in the cab, both wearing caps pulled low over their faces. A third figure leaned against the truck bed, cradling something long and metallic. A crowbar. Or maybe worse. Preston Whitmore wasn't here. Of course he wasn't. Men like Preston didn't get their hands dirty. They sent others to do the work they were too cowardly to face themselves. The trucks idled for a moment at the fence line, engines purring low. Then the doors creaked open and the men spilled out, moving quickly, fanning toward the barn. One of them carried a canister, gasoline by the way he sloshed it around with grim purpose. Another carried bolt cutters, already making a beeline for the lock on the barn gate. Marcus and Trey moved in first. No battle cries, no warnings, just swift, deliberate action. Trey stepped out of the dark, blocking the path to the barn with the solid, immovable presence of a stone wall. Marcus flanked from the side, a heavy flashlight beam cutting through the dark and landing squarely on the face of the lead vandal. In situations with the man froze like a deer in headlights. He looked young, no older than 25, his mouth half open as he processed the fact that this wasn't going to be the easy job he'd been promised. "You're trespassing," Marcus said, his voice calm but thunderous in the night air. "Leave. Now." For a beat. Nobody moved. Then, predictably, the biggest of the vandals stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Get out of the way, old man," he snarled, waving the crowbar like a club. "This doesn't concern you." Rivera appeared behind him in an instant, tapping the man's shoulder lightly. When the thug turned, Rivera grabbed the crowbar, twisting it out of his hands in one brutal, efficient motion that ended with the man face down in the dirt, gasping for air. Wendy stood up slowly from her seat on the porch, shotgun cradled easily in her arms, barrel pointed at the ground, but unmistakably ready. "You heard him," she called out across the yard. "Leave while you can still walk." The second truck's driver revved the engine, lights flickering on suddenly, cutting harsh beams through the night. Men piled back toward the vehicles, shouting, scrambling. Trey and Marcus didn't pursue them. They didn't need to. The message had been sent loud and clear. Wendy's heart pounded against her ribs as she watched the trucks reverse in a frenzy, tires kicking up rocks and dust. They disappeared back down the road, their red taillights vanishing like sinking stars. Only silence remained, thick and buzzing in her ears. Marcus lowered his flashlight. "That was the warning shot," he said quietly. "They'll be back, but not the same way." Wendy nodded, her grip tightening on the shotgun. Let them come. By dawn, they found the damage. The water tank that fed the livestock had been punctured, drained dry. Several fence posts were yanked out, tossed into the fields like discarded toothpicks. But worse, far worse, was the realization that Preston's strategy wasn't brute force anymore. It was exhaustion. Death by 1,000 cuts. The men worked fast to repair what they could. Griggs patched the tank with an old welding kit he found in the shed. Rivera and Trey reset the fence posts, driving them deeper into the earth. Marcus set up new watches. Longer shifts, sharper coverage. Wendy pushed herself harder than any of them, fixing, lifting, hauling. Every time her body cried for rest, she heard Daniel's voice in her head. Steady, patient, kind. "You don't quit just because it's hard, Wen. You quit when the job's done." By the time the sun reached its peak, the farm looked whole again, but Wendy knew it was a fragile, temporary victory. Late in the afternoon, a new player arrived. A black SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of the property. It wasn't Preston this time. It was a sheriff's deputy, young and fidgety, his uniform crisp but his face pale with nerves. Wendy approached him, with Marcus at her side. The deputy swallowed visibly. "Ma'am, sir," he said, tipping his hat. "Got a call about disturbances out here." Wendy crossed her arms. "We had trespassers, tried to set fire to the barn." The deputy shifted from foot to foot. "Mr. Whitmore says you're creating a hostile environment. He's filed for an emergency injunction, claimed you're endangering workers and blocking access to lawful construction efforts." Wendy's mouth twisted in bitter amusement. "Let me guess, he forgot to mention the arson, the sabotage, the vandalism." The deputy looked miserable. "Ma'am, I'm just here to deliver the notice." He handed over a folded packet of papers, his hand trembling slightly. Wendy took it without a word. "You have 24 hours to vacate, pending a court hearing," the deputy said, his voice almost apologetic. "If you don't, they'll come with an eviction order." Marcus leaned in slightly, his voice a low rumble. "Tell Whitmore this isn't over." The deputy nodded hurriedly and scurried back to his SUV, tires spitting gravel as he made a hasty retreat. Wendy stared down at the papers in her hands, heart hammering in her chest. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling under her boots. Marcus placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. 24 hours, he said quietly. "That's plenty of time." Wendy looked up into the faces of the men surrounding her. Daniel's brothers. Her brothers. "Now, we're not going anywhere," she said. The others nodded. No speeches, no grand declarations, just a shared understanding that none of them would back down. As the sun bled into the horizon once again, painting the sky in fierce shades of crimson and gold, Wendy felt something settle inside her. Not anger, not fear, conviction. They would stand their ground. But tomorrow, when Preston Whitmore came to tear it all down, he was going to find out exactly what it meant to pick a fight with a Marine's family. The morning air was heavy with expectation. It wasn't just another sunrise over the Gosling farm. It was a reckoning. Wendy stood at the edge of the porch, boots planted firmly on the weathered wood, the old Marine Corps flag that Daniel had once hung fluttering above her. Beside her, Marcus adjusted his cap, his expression unreadable, but his presence steady as a mountain. Behind them, Trey, Rivera, and Griggs were spread out across the yard, each man calm, alert, ready. They had no illusions. Preston Whitmore was coming. And this time, he would bring more than trucks and papers. The sound of engines tore through the morning silence. Wendy could feel it vibrating up through the soles of her boots long before she saw them. A convoy rolled down the dirt road. Black SUVs, 2 police cruisers, and a flatbed hauling construction equipment. Preston's war chest, rolling in to crush her spirit. The lead SUV stopped with a puff of dust, and out stepped Preston, wearing a tailored suit far too crisp for farm country, a smile far too sharp to be anything but a blade. Next to him stood a man in a county sheriff's uniform, different from the young deputy from before. This one was older, thicker, with a gold badge gleaming like a weapon on his chest. Sheriff Darnell, the name stitched on his pocket, surveyed the scene with the bored look of a man who thought the ending had already been written. Preston strolled forward like he owned the place. "Wendy," he called out, voice syrupy with mock politeness, "this is your final warning. Vacate peacefully, and I'll even sweeten the deal. Another 50 grand on top of the original offer." Wendy didn't move. Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting the morning like a blade. "You're trespassing." Preston's smile faltered just a fraction. "I have a court order," he said, waving the folded papers like a trophy. "Sheriff Darnell is here to enforce it. You're out of options." The sheriff shifted, clearly impatient to get on with it. He reached for his belt, where a pair of zip ties hung beside his gun. Wendy raised her voice, firm and clear. "I have documentation proving fraudulent activity involving Mr. Whitmore, including bribery of county officials and illegal tampering with utilities, and I have witnesses." Preston's face paled slightly. Wendy reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a slim folder, holding it up high. "Certified copies, already filed with the State Attorney General's office as of this morning, courtesy of some friends who know how to navigate bureaucratic red tape faster than you buy suits." Marcus grinned without humor. "We made some calls overnight. Turns out not everyone in the county's for sale." The sheriff hesitated, his eyes flicking between Preston and Wendy. "And there's more," Wendy continued, voice steady as iron. "I have security footage of your men committing arson, vandalism, and trespassing on private property." She nodded toward the barn, where a small camera still blinked under the eaves. "You think we just sat here and waited? We documented everything." The crowd that had started to gather, neighbors who had watched from afar, townsfolk who had heard rumors, began to murmur. Pickup trucks lined the edges of the road now, men and women leaning against their hoods, arms crossed, faces grim. They weren't here for Preston. They were here for Wendy. The sheriff cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Mr. Whitmore, maybe we need to slow this down. Proper investigation procedures, you understand." Preston whirled on him, all pretense dropping. "You said you'd handle this." The sheriff took a cautious step back. "Not if it's going to cost me my badge." Preston's jaw clenched so tight his teeth ground audibly. He turned back to Wendy, rage boiling behind his eyes. "You think you've won?" Wendy stepped off the porch, walking until only a few feet separated them. She looked him straight in the eye. "I don't think," she said. "I know." At that moment, another set of sirens echoed down the road, and 2 black sedans bearing the insignia of the state attorney's office came into view. They parked with a screech of tires, and 2 agents in dark suits emerged, moving with the purposeful stride of people who didn't come to negotiate. Preston Whitmore, the lead agent announced loudly, flashing a badge. You are under investigation for multiple counts of bribery, conspiracy, property damage, and harassment. The blood drained from Preston's face. You have the right to remain silent, the agent began, as another officer moved behind Preston and snapped cold steel cuffs onto his wrists. The townsfolk exploded into cheers, a spontaneous roar of approval that rolled across the fields like thunder. Preston struggled, cursing, but the agents held him firm, reading him his rights in a clear, emotionless voice. Sheriff Darnell, suddenly very interested in the dust on his boots, made no move to intervene. As they dragged Preston toward the waiting sedans, Wendy stood still, her hands loose at her sides, her heart pounding in her ears. She thought she might collapse from the sheer weight of it, the fear, the relief, the sheer stubborn joy of standing her ground and winning. Marcus stepped up beside her, grinning wide now, no restraint. "Told you we weren't done yet." Tears pricked at Wendy's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Thank you," she said, voice thick with emotion. "All of you." Briggs clapped her gently on the back. Daniel would have been proud as hell. Neighbors came forward now. Mrs. Hawkins from down the lane, Pete with his dusty old hat, even gruff old Mr. Davis from the feed store, offering hugs, handshakes, words of admiration. The tide had turned not just because Wendy fought back, but because the community remembered what real strength looked like. They remembered what mattered. Family, honor, home. Wendy glanced toward the old oak tree, its broad arms sheltering the yard like a watchful guardian. She could almost hear Daniel's voice on the wind, warm and proud. That evening, after the crowds dispersed, Wendy sat on the porch again, Marcus beside her. Rivera and Griggs were fixing the broken fence, while Trey started up a slow barbecue in the yard, the scent of roasting meat filling the air. They weren't going anywhere yet. Not until everything was set right. The farm was safe. The land would stay in Wendy's hands. But more than that, Wendy had won something deeper, an unbreakable bond of brotherhood that Daniel had built, that now lived on stronger than ever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with fire, Wendy let herself finally breathe deep and easy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight victory belonged to them. And she was not alone. Not now. Not ever again.